Okay, how's everybody doing? Welcome to another edition of Fuse, which is a ceramics artist lecture series. My name's Joe Hicks. I'm faculty at Marymount University, and this is all taken part from the Marymount University Ceramics program. And so I just want to thank everyone for coming today. We've got a really great show for you um, by the name of Tim Sherman. I'm really excited to hear what he has to present with you guys, and I'm really excited to engage with everyone, and I'm seeing a lot of people from not only from my classes but the local and regional community. So I really appreciate everyone coming. I want to start out first by just explaining a couple of things. If you look in your chat in Zoom, I've posted a number of links. And so I just wanted to kind of go over a couple of those links and just kind of show you a couple of things that's happening at Marymount right now. This will just take a minute. And so first, I just want to go over the Fuse Lecture Series page. This is where we host. This is at mufinearts.com. This is a website that our program puts out to engage with the community and highlight all sorts of events and things that are going on with our programs. There's a page dedicated to Fuse Lecture Series. Today is obviously Tim Sherman. We're excited about that. And you can see all sorts of images and things like that. But we've also are hosting past lectures that we've had. We've had 3 so far. So we had Arako, who is currently at the District Clay Center right now. And I've recorded all of these and posted them on the MU Fine Arts YouTube channel. So if you've missed anything, you're welcome to go to either here to view these lectures, or I can show you where the MU Fine Arts YouTube channel is as well. We also hosted Judith Varga, which was another amazing lecture. Her work is just really amazing, and she gave just a great lecture. So you can see here that video is also embedded, so you're welcome to check that out. Just in case if you're curious, this is the MU YouTube channel. So right down here, you can find all the Fuse lecture series and then some other things like the Cody Gallery and some other artist openings that we've had online. Then there's just one more event that I want to invite everyone to. The Horizons Design and Art Exhibition that opens this Friday. That's a virtual reception. You can find the link at our Barry Gallery webpage, which you're on right now. That's this Friday from April 9th, starting at 5. This is a collegiate competition, so this was open to any university student in Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia. So that should be a really, really great event. So we invite everyone. And again, you can find those links. I also posted this PDF in the chat, so you're welcome to download this PDF. This is our marketing. And you can see these are all workable links here. So this is the Zoom link, and then this is the Barry Gallery link. And you can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at MU Arts. So we look forward to perhaps seeing you there. Just one thing about the forum. What I keep everybody on mute, so everyone's on mute. And after Tim's presentation, we're gonna open it up for some Q&A. And I invite anyone to make comments or offer questions in the chat. And then I will gladly field questions when we arrive to that particular part of the presentation today. So, all right, well, then I guess we'll move on. I have a couple of things to share about Tim before I pass it on. Okay, so here we go. Tim Sherman is a studio potter working and living in Frederick, Maryland. He holds a BS in art and design from Towson University and currently exhibits his work in galleries across the United States. His work references both historical and modern wood firing and forming techniques, which heavily influences his choices in form, aesthetic, and functional design of his work. Excuse me. Tim is well known in providing forms of community wood firings at his property that offer the opportunity for other local potters to participate in and learn from his firing process. He also openly shares his kiln building projects, which offer a unique and informative perspective into a complex process of designing and building large wood firing kilns. His kiln designs are technical and innovative, and I'm very excited to have learned a great deal about his designs, about kiln design from his projects myself. So I really appreciate that. Tim's recent exhibition record includes Inspired by Malcolm, A Passion for Shino. That'll be at the Sandy Spring Museum this upcoming July 2021. Also, Contemporary Clay at the Western Colorado Center for the Arts in 2020. And he has been a consistent participant in the well-known Strictly Functional Pottery National in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Tim also received first place award at the Strictly Functional Pottery National in 2012 by juror Jack Troy, who himself is one of the most influential American wood firing potters of the last 50 years. So that's quite an honor. He's also represented by multiple galleries, including the Little Pottery Shop in Frederick, Maryland, the Baltimore Clayworks Members Gallery in Baltimore, Maryland, and the Charlie Cummings Gallery in Gainesville, Florida. And so I'm excited to invite Tim today to participate in the Fuse lecture series, especially because he has tremendous insight to offer students, not only as a successful potter, but also as a successful business owner in the arts and crafts sector, and has a lot of knowledge to offer about building kilns. He's also a really nice guy who is open to sharing his knowledge, and I always enjoy talking with him. So without further ado, here's Tim Sherman.
Wow, Joe, that was very sweet. I really appreciate that nice intro. I'm really excited to be here, and thanks for thinking of me to do this too. It's quite an honor to be able to present to a really large, strong community of potters and sculptors that are in this area. So I'm really excited to be here. I appreciate that. Looking through the list of people on this meeting, some of you I've worked with very recently, so I apologize for telling you some stuff that you probably already know. I know there's some Montgomery Potters in here too, and I presented for them. So there's a lot of overlap between that. But what I really want to do is open it up at the end because I think the questions are probably going to be, the best way to really get to know what you want and not hear me talk, which I'm not, that crazy about anyway. So I have a kind of a short PowerPoint presentation that'll hopefully get you up to speed if you don't know who I am. And if you do, you probably have seen some of this before. And then I have a website where I try to catalog my work and my kiln building projects. So I'd like to take everyone through some of that as well, and hopefully that will spark some ideas and maybe some questions that we can get into at the end. So if that sounds good, that's what we'll do. Go ahead, and I also apologize for any Zoom faux pas. I haven't done much of this. I've been working a lot in the studio, so we'll see how it goes. All right, so this is my family. Chelsea is on the right. She's been a pivotal part in making the practice that I'm doing right now at home, as far as firing my kilns with groups of potters. It wouldn't be possible without her. And then I guess it's a September and a half ago, we welcomed Lola there in my arms, and she's about 19 months now. So she's running and talking and collecting wood and all that good stuff. So it's been a very exciting last year. And this is us standing in front of the newest kiln, the train kiln. I'm going to take you through basically where I started as far as how I got interested in this, which I'm coming to find out the more I do this, the more that story seems to ring true with a lot of people. I had to take a class in high school. In order to play lacrosse, I had to boost my GPA just to be able to have a baseline to be able to play. And I thought ceramics would be an easy A. My sister kind of convinced me of that. And it wasn't. I think I got a C the first semester, and then the second semester, when we got introduced to the wheel, I just there was just something about taking that lump of dirt and spinning it up into a bowl is what I saw for the very first time. And I had never seen the potter's wheel up until that first day. And I never looked back. That I was hooked from there on out. Um, and like I do in most places, I start to take over. This is my parents' basement. I asked for a wheel for Christmas. I guess this is probably my senior year of high school. Um, a local potter was getting rid of a kick wheel, so I nabbed that, and I just made some really terrible pots for the summer between high school and college. Um, I just dove into everything. I bought glazes that didn't make any sense for what I was trying to do, and clay that was the wrong cone. Just giant mistakes, but I was really, really excited about it. And I, without my parents' encouragement, I think they maybe thought it was a phase, but they were pretty wrong about that. They were super encouraging and helped me with space, and then they bought some materials and of course the wheel for my, I believe it was a graduation or a birthday present. My birthday's in July, so it could have been either one. Um, that fall, I attended Towson University. It was the only school I applied to, and looking back, it was a bad idea. The only reason I even applied is because they had 30 Brent C wheels in one room, and I was really, really enamored with the size and the scope of their studio. They had electric kilns, they had gas kilns, they had an outdoor raku setup, which I had never even heard of until that class was offered to me. Um, what they also had was a clay mixing facility, and I quickly got, I don't know if I got tricked into it or if I just was looking for something to do, but I started mixing clay there as a kind of a side. They paid. It wasn't a a free thing, but they needed a lot of clay because they had a lot of undergraduate students coming through that program. Um, and I mixed stoneware and earthenware clay, and that meant I got to use as much as I wanted of it. So that's what I did. I was in the studio all hours of the day and night. I really had nothing else but classes going on. I lived close to campus, so I was tracking a lot of clay around the Towson area at that point. I was making batches for myself and then for all of the undergraduate and graduate students. So it was quite a bit. They had 4 Soldner mixers and they were running pretty consistently. So I made a lot of pots in that time. The one downside looking back that I didn't really realize was going on is that the ceramics chair, the head of the department, was leaving as I was coming in. So um, he was ready to go, I think. And what ended up being was more of an independent study for most of my time. There were some really influential people there that helped me a lot. Rich Holt being one of those. That really cared about what I was doing and how interested I was in it. So, um, yeah, this is the kind of work I was starting to make then. They had 2 cone 10 reduction kilns, which coming from commercial cone 6 was a big jump up for me as far as excitement goes. The glazes were beginning to run and melt and do different, what I considered at that time really unpredictable things. Looking back, they're pretty much tried and true recipes, and they did kind of exactly what they were supposed to. But I was really interested in um, just the fluidness of everything that came out of that reduction kiln. Like I said, they also had a raku setup. The way I understand it now, they have an indoor raku setup, which is really interesting to me. It's they have a big hood over like a clamshell type raku kiln, so they can do that all times of the year inside, which is, I think, is pretty nifty. I made, like I said, giant pots, little pots, every kind of pot because I had access to the clay, the wheels. At a certain point, they would give you your own shelf that you could fill up with whatever junk you had. And I did that, and I think I took over both of my neighbors too because I was pretty prolific just because I was in there so often. So these are some really wacky multi-part pieces. I saw, like, it might have been a Ceramics Monthly, but a salt firing that was happening, and it was a kiln that was converted from an electric kiln shell. And like I said, Rich Holt at Towson was really interested in helping me in any way that he could. And he said, we've got some old kiln shelves in the back. If you want to try this, we can set you up. So I took one of these, loaded it in the back of my pickup truck, and took it to my parents' house, cut some holes in it, stuck some pots in there, and just let the gas rip. And it worked. And I got some really interesting results out of this kiln and some really strange looks from my parents' neighbors. But there were some really interesting things going on. Stuff that, I didn't even know what was happening. I probably still don't, but like surfaces that were just way beyond my expectations were coming out of this little converted updraft kiln. It did fire pretty uneven, but I would get like cone 11 in 8 hours or so. So it was quick. You could turn around really fast. And like I said, there's some really nice surface qualities that were coming out. The pots weren't great, but some of the surfaces were. That really jump started my interest in firing in atmospheric kilns. So wood kilns, salt kilns, it didn't really matter. I just wanted to put pots where there was fire. And this is the kiln at Baltimore Clay Works. I went over there on a Friday just to visit, just to check things out. It's not far from Towson. Jim Dugan was loading the kiln that day with a group and said, if you can grab a couple pots, we're short, and take a shift or two, you can put some pots in and hang out. I said, okay. I went home, got them, came back, and I just never looked back. I never left, honestly. That whole first firing, I was there the entire 24-hour duration from start to finish. I was there for the loading, unloading. And then the following week, he actually was looking for an assistant, and I jumped on the opportunity to do that. And that was really an intense thing. We fired this kiln that we're looking at, we fired 35 times, 2 years in a row, mostly in the spring and fall, but that is like back-to-back weekends for most of the spring and fall. And that includes collecting all of the wood, all the fuel, making wadding, cone packs, grinding shelves. At this time, we only clean shelves by hand. I employ a fleet of grinders at my practice now, and it goes much faster, and the shelves are much cleaner, and we're able to keep things, really nice and squeaky clean here. But this was a giant learning step for me, because I just got dumped right into it full force from the very beginning. So I'm really indebted to Jim for helping me with all of that. This is a 2-chamber kiln. Updraft. It had to fire overnight because to the left of the chimney here is the Mount Washington Tavern, and we were not allowed to make smoke during the day because of all the tavern patrons. That tavern burned down the night that we fired one time, and that was really scary. So very memorable kiln site for me. There it is in full glory. Sunday morning, churchgoers are about to roll in across the street, and then the tavern is just behind those trees in the background. The studio building is to the left there. There's Jim. Jim's work was very influential to me too. It just had that really loose, spontaneous nature about it, but also extremely functional. I use a lot of Jim's work on a very regular basis because it just works so well. And it's also really nice to look at too. So you get the full effect of the form, the function, the beauty. It's all there. After my assistantship, I applied for the residency program and got one of the 3 spots that were available that year. And I just took over my studio space, much like my parents' basement, and filled it up with every pot that I could possibly make. I was, like I said before, I was in there in the studio pretty much any chance I could. At this point, I was also working at Claywork Supplies right down the road. So I'd work there, get off work, and come make pots in the studio. At this point, I was renting that Noborigama out to myself or for myself and firing probably about 90% of my work alone in that kiln, just because of the sheer volume. There were also a lot of groups that were coming in and out, so it was hard to get a spot in that kiln. So I was learning quick what to do and what not to do as far as how to run a kiln, because I was starting to do it by myself at this point, which is probably 3 or 4 years into my first wood firing experience. My influences at this time, if you couldn't tell from that table full of work, were Tom Coleman, Stephen Hill, that really loose gestural. It just looks like it's happenstance, but then at the same time, everything is there on purpose and for a reason. The glazes complement the forms. There's no hard lines. Everything is fluid, and that's what I'm still really drawn to at this point. Looking back at these pictures, it's just like, oh yeah, this is the kind of pot that I like, that I want to make, that I want to use. So this is a heavy influence on me. Jack Troy was a huge influence. He just made the pots that seemingly he wanted to make. He wasn't doing it for somebody else, which really appeals to me. That I want to, if I'm going to spend this much time doing this, I don't really want somebody else to tell me how or why or what to make. That being said, I do make plenty of stuff that I want people to use in their homes and make available, but I also want to have control over what the final piece is and why it is that way. The Unzicker brothers, I was totally inspired by they're extremely prolific, they're extremely dedicated. They just seem to have the right way to do everything, it seems like, except for their kiln shed, which at the time that I met them, they didn't have a kiln shed. They would fire their kiln all times of the year without a shed, which looking back, I would not recommend. Gail Nichols, again, that fluidness, the change in the shape that complements the glaze and the color, or in this case, no glaze, just the soda vapors that are attracted to the silica in the pots. It was the first time I really took note of what was in the clay. I knew that clay was, for making the clay at Towson, I knew that there were certainly ingredients, but she was using um, different types of ingredients to really complement the surfaces and not just to be structurally stable for the clay. So I really started to take note with that in these pieces. And then of course, the way they're stacked in the kiln has been a huge part of how things are done in the wood firing process, and then how I try to teach people how to do it when they come here. Um, this is one of mine from that time period. We're looking at like 2011 is when these pots are coming out and when that studio shot was taken. So this is like a large serving platter with multiple sprayed glazes. It's like a tall vase, probably 20 inches in height. I really got interested in ash glazes for all those same reasons, how they run and meld and find their way into every nook and cranny and highlight areas like that. This is another big platter. Same thing with ash glazes. You probably see that Stephen Hill influence, that big slip swirl, letting the glaze kind of really make it pop and highlight in those areas. Favorite job I've ever had still to this day was the Claywork Supplies job. I got to drive a forklift and got clay at cost. So I really took advantage of both of those things. And I met a ton of great people, both at Clayworks. Hands down, that's been the greatest platform for meeting people that were interested in the same thing I was with the wood firing process. But then Claywork Supplies was great because I could not teach, but answer questions and suggest things to people when they were setting up studios or selecting clays for different kinds of firings. And it's just been great to have that community. And most of the people that I work with are still there. Teresa, I'm sure most of you know, and Sam, who owns it. They've just been great for everything during and then after my time there too. So I really enjoyed that. At the end of my time at Baltimore Clayworks, I was afforded a solo show, which was really great. I had these shelves and pedestals built specifically for this room. If you've ever been in this little solo space, it is really wacky. None of the walls are the same, distance from start to finish. They're also on strange angles. Most of them don't make a whole lot of sense unless you've been inside that building. They're also plaster, so there's nothing flat about any of the surfaces. So getting things to stay on the wall became a challenge. But the cool story about this is that the guy who built these shelves is now my neighbor, and he runs a sawmill. So I get a lot of my fuel from him, and it comes in the form of just slab wood offcuts that he can't use or sell as firewood because they're too small for most people who are burning wood in their homes to mess with. So that's been a really great relationship. He's bringing me a flock of chickens this week. Now that I'm thinking about it, I have to get ready for that. This is during that show. Right around that time, maybe at this show, I can't remember. This big guy in the front is a former Redskins football player, Chris Cooley, who was super interested in pottery at that time and painting. And he had just opened a gallery in Leesburg, Virginia, and we kind of hit it off. And he really liked my pots for whatever reason, and we started a relationship. I started firing with him pretty soon after that. I'm not really. Oh, at this point, I was done with my residency at Baltimore, so I was looking for the next step. My wife had just graduated from college, so we were looking for a place to live. Her dad was looking for a place to move to, and this was the house that he had built. And it just happened to work out that we rented his house at first from him, and then we ended up buying it in, I want to say 2014, 2013, the end of that year. We bought this house, and we've lived in it ever since. It also, the big selling point for me is that it had a wood shop on it, a metal building, and that I knew would be a perfect studio. It also has 5.5 acres, so I knew there was going to be some land to build a kiln. But that was all sandwiched right in the same time frame. This is a shot of Chris's gallery in Leesburg. He was a pretty popular dude for a long time. I'm sure he still is. But the gallery events were swamped, and we sold a ton of pots. I was fortunate to kind of ride on the coattails, and I sold a lot of work out of this space while it was still there. And then he actually offered me a job to do some of the gallery work, which was really great, and also help him fire and process his pots as well. He had a wood kiln. This is in his studio, um, pretty close to the gallery in Leesburg. So we would make pots together, and then we would fire them in his wood kiln that was attached to his house. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that before, but that's the chimney going up through his deck. And that's his bedroom window about 8 feet away from that. So as you can imagine, seeing this from the road is alarming to a lot of people. And I lost track of how many times the fire department would walk around the backyard. They knew what was going on, but they had to come. For people that were just, worried that the house was burning down. So it's pretty interesting. They always got a kick out of it. And I'm sure it wasn't exactly up to code. But that's me stoking on an August firing, no shirt, no shoes, and I would jump into his pool after every stoke because it was so hot. But it was a pretty fun, memorable time. That's a shot of my work in that gallery on Keith, who built my table, my shelves for my show. So that's all his woodwork there. A nice, big, beautiful gallery space. Lots of people came through those doors to see pots. So it was really exciting for me, being so new, to have so many people see my pots. The Washington Post wrote up an article about Chris and included me in that, so that was really nice too. This is the work I was making at that time. So it's just a couple years later from those big platters. Again, fluid glazes, trying to get away from that super drippiness, but also having a fluid surface. I still really like this pot, the matte quality, almost like a wet fruit or something. I'm still drawn to this effect. My studio mate, my neighbor in Baltimore, Yoshi Fuji, he carved this. This is one of my pots that he carved, and then we fired it in Chris's kiln. It's a pretty big pot. It's probably 2.5 feet tall, 14 or 16 inches wide. It's a serving bowl fired in Chris's kiln. As I was working for him, he got cut from the Redskins, so there was a big change in lifestyle, and he was looking to sell this great big house, 10,000 square foot house in Loudoun County. I'm sure was not cheap to maintain or anything. So he was looking to sell, and he said nobody will buy this house with a wood kiln attached to the deck, and we both laughed and agreed. And he offered me the bricks if I were willing to tear it down. So I jumped on that opportunity. I knew how much fire bricks cost. And I spent probably close to 2 weeks taking bricks up to our new house in Frederick and taking them from his place in Virginia. At that same time, probably that same week, Bill Van Gilder sent me a message about an auction for a quarry in Virginia that was selling off fire bricks for their rotating lime kiln. I asked what they were. He said he had no idea. The item description was just fire brick, and 17 pallets of them. So I put a bid, and nobody bid on them but me. So I got them for a really, really low rate. And the next item that was up was those two pallets of castable on the left. I didn't know what they were. I didn't want to haul them away. But nobody bid on those, so they just threw them in with the previous lot, which was mine. So at this point, I have 17 pallets of bricks, 2 pallets of castable, and I paid $25 for it. That was exciting, but I had no idea how to get them home. So I rented this truck from Rentals Unlimited. I don't know what the statute of limitations for this kind of thing is, but I overloaded that truck by about 2.5 times, and I just didn't know. I didn't know how heavy these bricks were. And I got a couple buddies we had to hand load each of these bricks, and they don't look very big, but each of those bricks are 18.5 pounds, high alumina Super Duty fire brick. And they're all arch brick, which I didn't know either going into it. I probably wouldn't have been interested had I known. But we took them, loaded up this truck and burnt the brakes completely out of it on the way home. I didn't get my security deposit back for the truck, but I did get a whole bunch of bricks out of the deal. I sold the bricks that were left over that we couldn't haul, so I ended up making money on this adventure, which is kind of funny. But it helped me, and it helped a potter in Virginia that was looking for fire brick too. He was more than excited to pay for the leftover. So this is the shot of the first shot I saw of a kiln that I was just really, really blown away by. This is the Unzicker brothers. At the time, they were in Indiana. They had a kiln it's about the same size as the one I'm going to show you, and they would fire it by themselves, 8-hour shifts, 8 hours on, 8 hours off. And like I said, they didn't have a shed, so they were firing in all elements by themselves, and they were making absolutely beautiful work. So that made me think, if they can do it that way, I can sure do it with a bunch of help. So that's what I did. I also really like this kiln because of the barrel arch. It's not self-supporting. Over time, this arch will collapse if you don't put enough buttressing around the outside to keep weight on the arch, keep it from expanding. And what'll happen is it'll fall in from the center, which is a pretty scary thing to think about. This is their kiln from the outside. Plenty of buttressing, if you ask me, and no shed. This is their studio. Again, I'm just like every image I see that they have, I just nod my head and say, yep, this is what I want to do. So I'm just so impressed by the volume. The quality is completely there. And then the surfaces when they come out were incredible. Still are. I think they do separate things now, but they're still both really amazing potters. This is the very first step in my kiln building process, besides acquiring some bricks, was to hire the neighbor to dig a big trench. It's on the northwest side of our property, and he just took a big scoop out and took off. So this is what I had to work with after that. I put up a pole barn, a pole shed first. This is in the fall. It immediately filled up with water, that hole. This is the building going up the fall of 2013. My father-in-law up there hanging on, helping me out. I had no construction experience, but we pieced this together. It has some unique features. It also has held up really well. I've added on to it twice now, and it works great for what is under there. That's a nearly finished shot of it. That clear story that runs the entire length of the top opens up, and the idea behind that was that smoke would be able to come out and not fill up that entire cavity where the trusses are. It does work really well. The prevailing wind seems to be non-existent here. It just swirls all around, so it's hard to predict where the wind's going to come from. Usually when we're firing, I will open that, and it just lets air circulate so it doesn't get too smoky inside the kiln shed. But that's just that whole entire clear story, 4 feet tall, is on one big hinge, and it just opens up towards the camera shot here. There's a couple pictures of it in construction. Laying out bricks, no concrete foundation. It's all sand, stone, and block that's holding up. This is the first kiln that I built. Really a trial and error process. I didn't have a drawing. I didn't know what to draw, so I figured why bother, and I just started laying bricks out based on what I had. The first 6 or 8 courses, those are the primary air holes in the front there you're looking at, looking back towards the chimney. I use those random bags of castable wherever I could. So this is filling in above that main primary arch to make the surface flat again with the course that's up above there. A little further along, starting to lay in uh, the forms for the arch. So they need a lot of support because until the key is cast, that arch weighs probably close to 10,000 pounds. And if there's not enough support, it won't it won't work. So there's steel bars on top of bricks there to help hold everything up. Tucker there on the right inspecting the wooden ribs. They get progressively smaller on this kiln. You can think of it if you took a beer bottle or a wine bottle and just laid it on its side. That's very much what it looks like. The biggest portion is in the front, and then it tapers down to a neck at the back. I got that idea from the Unzickers, who convinced me that to enhance the biggest, where the sweet spot of the kiln is, which most potters would tell you would be in the front where the firebox is. Why not just blow that up and make it bigger, which is unlike the traditional anagamas where they start small, get big, and then get small again, kind of like the shape of a flame. It really made sense to me if you just cut that flame in half, you get the most bang for your buck in the front of the kiln because it's the biggest. And the shot you're looking at here, that inside of that is 7 feet tall and 7 feet wide. And then it tapers down to exactly half that, so 3.5 by 3.5 at the exit flue. There's some rib work going in that's going to support that arch that I was talking about. These are all the bricks from Virginia from the quarry. So all those great big arch bricks, and it's not very easy to make them bend. They don't want to turn a curve. So plenty of mud was used at the back end where it really tapers. This is the final courses before the arch is secured and a key is cast. So the idea here, if you haven't done much kiln construction or any, is that the bricks at the top and the middle don't necessarily want to fit together in a lot of these kilns. So what a really easy and typical solution is to pour castable in that void. In this case, it's like that zipper shape, but a lot of times it's just a single, it almost looks like a brick shape, but you would pour castable so that it's extremely tight and there's no wiggle room for bricks to start to slip and slide and fall. That is the day after we cast the key, which is between my legs, Tucker and I on top for scale. And that's the completed arch. That's the inside after that form was taken out, which is a very scary day for me, anxiety filled for sure. That was probably 3 or 4 weeks of work laying the arch bricks, and then to pull that form out in about 10 minutes is it's very nerve wracking. But it's a very, I think, a very cool look to the inside of the kiln where it meets in the middle, very cathedral-like or like a tunnel. This is the tail end of the kiln or the base of the chimney. That's probably the most unique feature about this kiln is that the loading is all happening through the base of the door. I'm sorry, through the base of the chimney. You're looking at the door right there where the bricks are stacked up underneath that independent arch. And the idea again is that you can fill the front of the kiln as nicely as you want with the work that you've been working on specifically for that spot, and then work your way towards maybe the less desirable spots of the kiln, and not run out of work by the time you get to the front of the kiln. So the front gets packed first when I have the most energy, the clearest vision, and then by the end, when we're just looking for pots to fill space, it's not nearly as important. That also lets you make the kiln as long or as short as you want. If you run out of work, you could slide. I hope I have a shot of I put a stemma wall, so like a checkerboard wall at the base of the chimney right before it enters the chimney. And you could slide that wall, each firing either forward or backward to make the kiln smaller if you had to. We haven't done that yet because there's always enough work to fill it or close to it. So it stays about right. Chimney going up. That chimney is completely made out of arch bricks from about chest height up, just because that's all I had. So it's probably the world's heaviest wood-fired chimney. It's pretty stout. Like I said about the arch on a barrel collapsing, you need to have a lot of weight behind it. So this is all stone from our property, and then gravel from the local quarry just to hold everything in place. It also helps insulate. This kiln takes 7 days just to cool down, and even then it's like 150 inside. But it's cool enough that you can get in and get the pots out. That's the front of the kiln, which is a permanent wall. The other big advantage of having the door in the back is those bricks never get stuck together. There's never any replace. There's the same door bricks I've had from the first firing, and it takes about 20 minutes to brick up the door, as opposed to I've spent hours on doors at other kilns that are overhead. So this wall is fixed; it doesn't change, and I really like this design. All the junk rubble from Chris's kiln that I tore down is underneath the floor. So it's just like a buffer between the actual earth, hopefully keeping some of the moisture down. And then on top of that is all sand. So this is a shot from the first loading. You're looking towards the front of the kiln. You're looking at the back of the stack, looking towards the front of the kiln. So like I said, we load almost in reverse of where I've done it before. This kiln requires a lot of pots that have shoulders. You can see how much arch space is there, which is kind of a blessing and a curse. It helps. I think it helps people make work that they otherwise maybe wouldn't make, and pushes their limits. Especially, I'm talking about myself specifically, making bigger work that has more full volume to take up that space. Otherwise, the kiln does not fire as efficiently. The fire just rips right across the top of the kiln if there's not enough work there to block that. And that's not what I want. I want the fire to have to fight its way through every shelf. And that's kind of why it's stacked the way it is, with somewhat loose on the bottom and tall. And then those four middle shelves are pretty tightly packed with small things. And then that top again is as blocked off as we could possibly get it with the work that we had. And this kiln fire is more even than most of the small kilns that I've been a part of. There, so that's the shot of that stemma wall that is movable. It can either go up or back depending on how much work you have to fill the kiln. So that's looking in the door at that wall. That fire has to fight through those bricks to get out of the kiln. Wood is my second occupation: processing, splitting, stacking, all that good stuff. And then the biggest thing is sourcing it. Where is it coming from? I don't like to pay for wood if I can help it. It cuts into any profit that I do turn. I like to not spend it on wood. So this is, again, Keith keeps showing up. I should send him a card or something. He's delivering bundles of that mill slab wood. You can kind of see how thin it is. It's also a lot of times in the 14 to 16 foot range. So it is a lot of work to process this down into usable size pieces. But at this point, enough people know what I'm doing. I'll come home some days and there'll be a couple truckloads of wood. I don't even know who brought it. So that's a nice problem to have. And then recently a tree company has been dumping pine here. So wood has only recently become an issue, only because of how ambitious our firing schedule has become. It never was before, but we really jumped up the number of firings each year. So it's more of a time thing, being able to process enough to keep up with everything. I like to stack wood neat because a lot of times it stays there for up to a year or more. And I don't like it to fall over. There's no sense in having to pick it up more than, if you've ever experienced firewood, you have to pick it up at least 3 times usually. So I like to keep it there where I put it. This would be a firing in the big kiln. So this is a typical of the first day. Fires at the bottom to warm things up. Most of my work goes in green because of the size of it. Also, my electric kiln is very, very small. And I usually only fire cups and generally things with handles to try to mitigate some of the cracking due to heating up too quickly. So we spend a whole entire day outside of the kiln with the fire to bring it up to and past quartz inversion without the fire ever touching the pots. So it's like 1100 degrees. And my dogs are going to go crazy here. Somebody just showed up. I apologize. Looking into the firebox on the second day. And as you can see, it's a really dirty, violent atmosphere inside this kiln. We burned about 5 cords in 3 days, and it's pretty intense. It's a lot of wood. but a lot of atmosphere too. I think that's one of the reasons the pots look the way they do is because they're getting a lot of juice in a short amount of time. Digital barometer we use. Sorry about this. And I don't know if you've ever seen cones fall backwards, but we experience that a lot of times just because of how slow everything is going. And the cones seem to not like that, and they curl over backwards too. So I included this shot because I had not seen it until we had fired this kiln, but it happens almost every time. So you're looking at cone 4, 5, and 6 bending the wrong direction before they flop over. It's kind of a nice shot of the back of the kiln. This is before any of the other additions were put onto it. The first couple firings, because none of my friends knew what the heck I was doing, they were all really intrigued. So they all showed up and they thought it was a big party. And it got a little crazy those first couple firings. But since then, the novelty has worn off and it's much more relaxing to stoke this kiln. But this is a shot from my cousin. The inside of the kiln shed right after a firing's finished. And then unloading day, like I'm sure most of you experience, this is pre-pandemic. We do wear masks up here, but it's just a giant receiving line. The cool thing too is it's grown over time, and people who don't even have work in the kiln will show up to either pick out work that they're gonna try to get at one of our sales, or just to experience. You know, a lot of people have never seen pots come out of a kiln, so this is kind of a unique thing for a lot of people. Like I was alluding to, we do 2 open houses every year. This is before the pandemic, and we would just totally take apart the bottom half of our house and fill it with pots from that previous firing. So we do one in the spring, one in the fall. This last year, I did 2 sales outside, which was really great because they could stay up for, I think I did a month for both of them at a time, and it was a self-serve sale, so people could come anytime they wanted. And then what happened was a lot of people were coming back a second time or third time in some cases. And then I would also get people that were traveling from a much longer distance because they had a bigger window of when to hit that. So there was some real benefits of not being able to have people in the house this year. And it also gave, I think, early on when the first sale happened and everybody was probably the most stir crazy, it was a good opportunity to get out of the city or travel a little ways and come see some pots and some kilns and stuff like that. So what I did like about having it in the house is that you could really see what they might look like if you bought a platter and wanted to hang it on your wall. You could kind of see what it might, you know, how it would lend itself to somebody's own house. This is a pot out of one of those one of the early firings, just raw porcelain. Like I was talking about Gail's work, I started including sand and different types of aggregate to change the surface and hopefully enhance it. And this is one that I was really happy with, where it's got multiple layers of that really shows the time it was in the kiln. Quick firings, you generally won't get something that has as many layers, and it's just the speed of the flame, the kind of wood that's burning, that all has a big impact. That's why I really love this pot. Similar thing, just very unique surface with no glaze added at all, just the time in the kiln, the type of clay, and the fuel too. This is when we were burning a ton of poplar when it was really accessible to me. And I think that had a big impact because it was so full of water. Our firings were very different than they are now. The colors are just not the same. And I kind of credit most of that to having cords and cords of poplar that we were going through. That soft ash melt, I really love that over top of this is a Chino glaze with a just natural ash on top of it. So a long, slow firing will give you these less long drips. I was getting pots that had drips that were 14 or 15 inches long, and they were going off the bottom of the pot. And that was from us firing too hot, too fast, and they couldn't hang on. Probably the second most, and this is, I'm sure it's not because of me, it's just a natural thing that would happen with big kilns, is that I put soda, in our case, baking soda in the back third of the big kiln. And the reason for that is I was just used to seeing people unloading the back of their anagamas and having dry brown pots or concrete looking surfaces, and I just was not interested in that. So my solution was to throw baking soda in the back of the kiln, and that has become most people, myself included, one of the best spots in the kiln is that back third. They get really heavy sodium buildup. They get a lot of carbon trapping because we're able to stoke the front of the kiln, which will have an impact on what happens in the back, obviously. And you can get these nice, rich carbon trapped grays. Even this is on the underside or a bowl that would have been upside down in the kiln. So the seashell in the middle is giving that little pink blush from the calcium. The picture from a few years ago. Some glaze work that also gets integrated in the cooler spots of the kiln, which aren't necessarily cooler. They're just not hot for as long. We'll put glaze work in there so it doesn't melt completely off the pot. Just a Shino cup. You can probably see that Tom Coleman influence, that kind of fluid nature to the cup and the surface. Firing things upside down has always been intriguing to me. Get the glaze to run the wrong direction where it looks like it's going against gravity. This is a tea bowl that was fired like on a post upside down, so that glaze drip at the top is coming from the glaze melting upside down when it's in the kiln, so running down that way. And I think this is the last slide. This is our puppies who you just heard bark a few minutes ago. Charlie is the little one and Tucker's the big one. And then there's myself and Chelsea on that one. I do want to go quickly to my website. I don't have any slides of the new kilns. I put all that online. So I just want to quickly go through that because that's what I've been focusing most on. I shouldn't say most on, but I've had a newfound I've just been spending a lot of time with those two kilns in the last year and a half. They're new to me, and a lot of people have already come through and fired. I know some of the people in this meeting have just very recently been here. We'll keep them on mute in case they didn't like their pots, but I'll show you a couple of those shots of the kiln, and hopefully I don't mess this up too bad. So can we see that? Okay, so hopefully, if you're not on Instagram, that's probably where I'm most active. I try to post pictures every week of what I'm doing or pots that have come out of the kilns or kilns themselves. But my website's kind of a good catalog of what I've done in the past and, um, maybe how I do things. It might be helpful. I'll just really quickly go through this. The soda in the train. The reason I want to talk about that is because I just built a train kiln for Tammy Martinez. So what I've kind of delved into with the experience that I've had on my own kilns is that I've built at this point just the one for Tammy Martinez. But it turned out to be a really, really sweet little kiln, and she's having a great time firing it and getting some really great pots. So this is kind of where that inspiration came from. These kilns are on the same pad, so they share a foundation. And what I tried to do was save a little brick, and in the long run, I ended up using more brick. So they share a chimney. They have two separate flues, but this is probably a good picture if it'll pop up. So the train kiln runs kind of north to south, and then the soda kiln runs east to west, and they're linked by a common chimney section back here. There is a flue that runs the entire length of the chimney, so you could fire these two either together at the same time or completely independent, and it wouldn't make a difference. In fact, we've done it both ways, and I can't tell a difference of which method would be better. But it posed a lot of challenges that were fun to work through. But in hindsight, it would have been so much easier to build two kilns and do it completely separate. But it looks cool. And when the fire's coming out two chimneys at once, it's pretty cool. The train kiln, I think, is pretty run of the mill, with the exception that it's much bigger than the ones that I've personally visited. It's about 108 cubic feet of stacking space. And that allows you to put a tremendous amount of pots for kind of a small kiln. It's just a great big box inside of it. The biggest advantage of the soda kiln is that it has a door that closes. I can't say by itself because there's no rigging to pull it closed, but two people can push the door shut, and then when you're done loading, that's all you have to do is pull it across this track system, and it closes that way. So it makes loading, or the end of loading day, much more enjoyable when you don't have to dip your hands in cold bricks and try to piece together a door that on a kiln like this would not be easy. The way the arch is built is not a very typical shape, and it would be very hard to brick this up with any kind of tightness to it. So the door seals it completely shut. It's I think a great solution to that that dreaded end of day door problem that a lot of potters face with their kilns. So the whole reason I even I even asked myself, why did you even build two more kilns? You had one big one that worked pretty well, but the reason was I get a lot of inquiries about people wanting to fire. They don't have a place to build a kiln. There's just not enough room in the kilns that they're firing with. They want to fire big work, whatever. So once I put the feelers out for bricks that first time, they just kept coming to me, and I just collected bricks until I decided I had enough to build these. So I didn't buy any bricks for these two projects. This second project, this is a better view of the whole thing. I just kept my ears and eyes open and set alerts on. If you're looking into doing something like this, the best thing you can do is set alerts on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace for fire brick refractories. I shouldn't tell all my secrets because I still collect bricks, but that kind of thing. You can go on like Proxy Bid, any of the online bidding websites, and set alerts. They'll send you an email when a lot comes up for this type of stuff. So it's been invaluable. I mean, these two kilns, my guess would probably be in the $40,000 range had I had to buy all the materials, and I didn't. I had to buy the cinder block that lines the bottoms of them and the slab. But the kilns themselves were relatively free or next to it. So it's possible to do as long as you can source your materials through multiple avenues. You can't just wait for somebody to say have a kiln's worth of brick for you. It probably won't happen. But most recently, this last year, we have fired the train and the soda kiln with what's happened is an individual or a small group has come to me and asked if they can rent out the entire space in either one of the kilns, and they will put a group together of their, either their studio mates or friends or whoever, and they'll fire it with the guidance from me. I provide the wood, the glazes, whatever kind of expertise I might be able to give. That's my job, and then they fill it with their own work. So it's been a lot of fun. It's kind of like Clayworks all over again. Get to meet new people. A lot of the people that I've met at Clayworks have come since to these firings. It's been really fun to kind of catch up and see where everybody's work is and how they're doing and all that stuff. So yeah, the other interesting thing, I don't know if it's interesting to anybody, but these two kilns and the shed, I built entirely by myself. Just wanted to see if I could do it. And it was really fun. The other cool thing about this, I don't want to drive anybody nuts with shed stuff, but this shed was all sourced from an apple orchard processing plant. So they processed apples in this metal building. It was a 2-story building, and they were selling off all the steel from it. So all the columns, which is kind of why it looks so funny. If you really stop and look at it, it's got a single column in the corner and then a double in the middle here. It's just the way that their factory was put together, which I never actually saw. I just saw a pile of beams in a field. And I just went through and picked ones that I thought I could build a giant rectangle. And then I got a couple extra, and there's a little overhang here that I store wood. And my trusty skid loader, I usually stick under there too to keep it out of the weather. But this was a really fun one to source all the materials secondhand. You can even see it in the kiln itself, how different each of those bricks are. They've been in different kilns or came from different manufacturers. So it's nice to be able to reuse a lot of stuff. Well, Joe, unless you have something for me to show, I do. If you do come to my website, there's all different. I kind of group work by different shapes. There's also a link to purchase. I usually keep that more stocked at the end of the year when I have the most inventory. Contact pages if you don't have my email. It's the same as my website though. If you're going to try to reach out, it's pretty easy to get a hold of me. But yeah, I'm happy to talk more, answer questions, whatever you think.
Yeah, well, thanks, Tim. That was really great and really informative. I was really interested in especially how you sourced all of your materials. So I appreciate you sharing that because that was going to be one of my first questions, which is how do you find all of the material? And we appreciate you letting your secret out. So hopefully you won't have too much competition.
Yeah, I think the best thing, and this is really the best thing, is that to let people know your intentions, that you're interested in bricks and stuff that like that, because a lot of times kilns will be, torn down, and that person or the new owner in some cases is really motivated to get rid of bricks, and that's generally the best time to
Yeah.
find them. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to start hitting the chat here. And like I said, if anyone has a question, just please put it in the chat and then I'll forward it on to Tim. Um, but I guess I'll just start out with Lauren Sherbeck. Um, what does Tim use for kiln shelves? I saw hollow core shelves. Are they the core light or some other shelf? So maybe you could just talk a little bit more about your shelves, how you're choosing shelves, whether or not that's associated with your design of your kiln. Maybe just, and maybe a little bit in how you're stacking. I know you were talking about how you stack your anagama and how you're trying to force the draft to do certain things. So I don't know, maybe you could just go into a little bit of that information. That'd be great.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't really, the shelf thing is pretty crucial. You have to have the right shelf for the right space. In my opinion, the one thing about Instagram is you get to see the good, bad, and the ugly, and there are certainly stacking situations that are less than ideal, whether it's just a lack of know-how or just a lack of materials and stuff to work with. But I try to keep a pretty giant inventory of shelves so that whatever situation comes up, I have the right size, the right shape, and then like you're asking about the quarter right and stuff, the right material is really important too. Those quarter right shelves, the ones that have the holes in them, do not fare well in the soda firing world or salt. If you're doing that, they literally will have a shelf life where they'll just start to fall apart at a certain point, and it's not a good situation. I know Carolina Courier had a whole soda kiln of work collapse because of shelf failure for those quarterite ones. But in the front of the Anagama, they're absolutely wonderful because they don't ever drip. They don't accumulate and melt enough ash to drip onto your pots. If you've ever seen that from carbide shelves, which is can be a real nightmare if you have nice quality surfaces and you have big blue bubbly drips and everything. That's not ideal. So the first batch of shelves I got was from the Kohler factory in Wisconsin. They cycle through their materials every so often, and they have to get rid of stuff. Once it's out of like a certain tolerance, if you fire a toilet on a shelf that's not flat, the toilet will not, you won't sit flat on that. So that was great. I don't, as far as I know, they don't do that anymore. But I got a whole crate of quarterite shelves, and it only cost me the shipping to get it to me. But that was when I, very initially started collecting materials. So that has not come up again. I do use silicon carbide in the back of the kiln, the soda section, just because I don't have to worry about those shelves. Like delaminating is an issue with the quarterite, and it's not with the silicon carbide. And then I have a handful of advancer shelves, which are those really thin, light ones, which are really great for stacking. Like they save a lot of space. They're very lightweight. You can put them in with one hand if you had to. If you had an awkward place you had to reach, you could use one hand. But they drip really, really badly, and it's frustrating. The best solution I've come up with is to spray if you have these advancer shelves and you're using them in the wood kiln, is to spray a kiln wash really, really lightly on the underside. So you're going to wash the top and the bottom to keep them from dripping, and that works really well. And those advancer shelves are how I built the train and the soda are built off an 18 by 18 inch shelf. Both kilns were built that way. I don't have a drawing of that, but that's how everything was laid out, was for 18 by 18 inch shelf. I hope that answers some of it. I use everything.
Hey, could I just maybe get into a little bit of technical since we're talking about shelves and stacking? I was curious because it seems like you're trying to really, really slow down your draft in your Anagama. And I was wondering if it's, related to your chimney size and because that's getting, you have so much pool, or if whether or not, you found if that like holds the temperature for a really, really slow firing, and if there's like a relationship with how you're stacking, with how you're building up your walls, and then how you're adjusting your draft. Could you go into a little bit of that, perhaps?
Yeah.
Am I getting too much into your secrets or?
I don't know if I have any secret. There's nothing I'm doing that somebody else isn't doing. But there's a reason for that. I do like that slow flame, and it's mostly for these. So when I'm firing plates and things, they're almost always upside down. Fire generally doesn't want to go down into a plate and then come back out, but it will go up under a plate. If you've ever flipped over a bowl out of a wood firing, they're generally like the most beautiful surfaces of the underside where the flame gets pinched down in between the shelf and the bottom of the bowl or whatever it is. So if you have a fast flame, it will just rip, just think of it like a river with no rocks in it. It's just going to rip right through and pour out the chimney. So by slowing that flame down, it has time to navigate all those nuances and it goes up under and leaves. That's what all of this patterning is here, is that flame. It's just like sediment in a river where it accumulates on the backsides and around boulders and rocks and things like that. So that's how I think about it, is how can I most easily get it deposited where I want it, and that's by controlling how fast that fire exits. If it's going too fast, you just can't control where it's going. So that's the biggest thing. And that stemma wall that I showed you is also built into both. Every kiln that I've built so far has had a checkerboard wall. So this is looking out of the train kiln. This wall back here is the exit flue. And what's not in this picture is I have a brick in each of these openings. Even when we fire, there's a brick in each of these. So the fire really has to fight to get out of there. If it doesn't, if it's open, which we fired the first time with that mostly open, is the fire will go right across the top of the kiln and right out. Just like the Anagama, it will go the easiest path of resistance. So that's why I really like to slow things down. You have much more control if you can increase the speed than if you can't slow it down, and I think that's a bigger problem.
And then do you have issues with like, temperature gain, or is there enough airflow coming into the front of kiln where you're able to control temperature gain, whether you're going up or down or slow? Like how versatile or how much agility do you have in that controlling mechanism?
Yeah, so that's in my opinion, we don't have a hard time. I don't know what other people think when they come to fire here, but we can usually set a time to finish and pretty much get within an hour or so, which is I think pretty good. What I will say is that I tried to overbuild like every aspect of every one of these kilns. So the chimney on all three of these are too big for what they are, which in my opinion is a much better issue than having not enough chimney. There's nothing less fun than fighting a kiln at the end of the day and only getting like cone 7 and having unmelted ash everywhere. That's just not, I'm not interested in doing that. So by sticking a few more courses and maybe an extra brick wide on each of the chimneys, that mitigates almost all of that stuff. And it's more about how much air, how much fuel. And then I fire a lot with the passive dampers, which are kind of what I consider to be the gas pedal of the kiln. How fast is it really pulling? And it's a very sensitive feature on all these kilns.
Yeah, I could talk technical stuff with like chimney
Yeah.
and those types of relationships all day, but I just want to move on. I know Ian has a question here. He was wondering about flashing slips and glaze, um, and about your decoration process. And I guess he was looking if you would perhaps go into like an overview of your intent, what you're thinking about when you're using these flashing slips and glazes, and how that relates to the firing process.
Yeah. So typically I'm making, I mean, if I haven't already shown enough, I'm making work that is either, you can either use it every single day, or my hope is that you'd be willing to hang it on the wall and have it out all the time as well. Um, so I usually don't put flashing slips on pots that don't lend themselves to be stacked in such a way that they'll be beneficial. So like a mug, for example, it's hard for me to stack my shape of mug on its side or in a way that a flashing slip will really show off. So I'll use glaze on a lot of these, and that'll highlight the areas that I want to be the focal points, which are that kind of waistband in the middle. This pinch shape does not stack well on its side. It has a tendency to either touch at the rim or the foot. So by stacking it right side up, I have a little more control of, you know, whether it's going to get stuck or not. I don't know if I have any pictures on here of this or not, but so sometimes I will stack them sideways. So this is a more gestural mug. It's got a dart cut out of it. And I did stack this one on its side with just a flashing slip to hopefully highlight, like it's pointing at the dart, like, look over here. So I will do things like that on occasion, but it's so much extra effort to do some of these things. And I'm also happy with the glaze work that I don't often do it. The places that I will use the flashing slip for the most part are like I was showing these plates and platters. I don't know what other people think of them, but I'm always so fascinated by how different these can look, even though they're the same slip, the same clay, um, same firing. They can look so different from each other. They also look very, interstellar, like comets or asteroids coming through the atmosphere. But that's where I use flashing slips, where I want the fire to really leave its mark on the pot and not so much let my glaze do the talking. I want to let the flame kind of dictate what's going on here. So that's when I change things up. I also will say that any wood kiln, there's typically going to be spots that are a little bit on the hot side, generally nearest the firebox. And if I do glaze every single piece, I can go ahead and count on grinding about half of them. So that's where the flashing slips come in really handy, is because these don't run. There's no running at all to any of the flashing slips. Um, this is the biggest drip I've probably ever gotten on a flashed pot, is just a little emerald drip around the rim or something like that. So they're very stable. They generally do better in the front of the soda and the wood sections of these kilns. So that's kind of when I'll differentiate from glaze versus slips. And that's on every shape. Some just lend themselves better. Like the plates are always seem to be nicer with the slips on them than the glaze.
Yeah, those plates are some of my favorites. I just love the variety and the stark contrast from, you know, the protection of the wad and the relationship with the wadding,
Yeah.
and then, the drafting of all of the ash and materials that interacts with the slip. They're just really, really nice. I these are some of my favorite pots,
Oh,
or
thank you.
yeah, some favorite pieces, I should say. Um, I have a question from Eric Bradshaw. Um, how do you usually decide your firing temperature range? And how do you prioritize or the flexibility in what you can fire and how efficiently it fires? Sorry, I'm misunderstanding the wording of the question. Maybe we could start off with, how do you usually decide your firing temperature? Um, and maybe perhaps the materials that you're using, in your production. Is there a relationship there?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it comes right back to the glaze and slip question, because the slips, like I said, they don't run. Even this plate I'm looking at here has just what we call butter slip on it, and it's got tons and tons of soda ash. I'm sorry, baking soda, the sodium built up on the surface, but I don't ever have to worry about that running and dripping. So those pots that just have the flash and slip, well, I generally like to get them in the cone 12 range for probably 6 or more hours, just to make sure that the rims don't have any crusty ash built up on them. That gives everything a chance to melt. And then the glaze work, the stuff that's got heavy glaze on it, I want that to be less hot for a shorter amount of time. So some of these pots that have a lot of ash glaze on them, that are really runny, drippy glazes, if they are at cone 12 for 6 or 8 hours, they will melt entirely off the bottom of the pot. So that's a real issue for me. Um, so I do try to control that. Like the front of the Anagama, we'll put a cone 13 as like the witness cone, and I will try everything I can do to not knock that cone 13 over. And I'm pretty lenient on the definition of knocking a cone over. As long as it's not in a puddle, that is sufficient to me. And I've gotten much better at that, being much more patient. Let heat work is a real thing. I think they talk about it on the the Orton Cone website a lot about a cone is not just a temperature for 1 second, it's for a length of time. And then you can also achieve results at a lower temperature if they're at that temperature for an extended period. So I really take that into account. Generally, we'll soak the front of the big kiln for 12 to 18 hours, and that's enough time to get the stuff, every bit of ash on the shoulders and things like that will keep everything melted down so that there's no crusty surfaces. And if you don't do that, I fire where there is plenty of like little crusty patches or melon skin. I'm sure some people know or have seen that. And that is just not desirable to me at all. I want everything to be relatively smooth for where it is and what it is. So I generally do the temperature kind of controlling by how much air is coming in the front of the kiln versus what the passive dampers are set at. So if there's a lot of air in the front of the kiln and the passive dampers are mostly shut, meaning that the chimney is pooling really hard with lots of air, you're going to get really hot, uneven atmosphere inside that kiln. And then vice versa, if you have very little air and the passives are wide open, and it's just like what you'll notice is if your kiln has a blowhole, there will be tons of smoke and fire coming out of that blowhole. That's probably too slow. So I try to gauge the pressure and the speed of the flame by those holes in the top of the kiln, those blowholes that kind of tell you what's going on without actually looking into the kiln. I don't want to do that if I don't have to. I don't know if that answered your question at all, but that's what I think about when I'm firing.
Yeah, could you what do you find about you just mentioned about being too slow in your firing? What types of characteristics in your pots do you see that are obviously unattractive that come from too slow of a firing? Like you had mentioned, too much smoke and too much back pressure.
I don't know if
Is
it's
there anything specific, or is it more of like, an efficiency issue?
right. I don't. Yeah, if you go too slow and you run out of time or fuel or resources, that's when you get that unmelted, those really stark differences in temperature between maybe the front and the bottom or the top and the back. Um, there's just for me, there's always been like a sweet range, like a sweet spot that if you stay in that zone, good things will happen. Your kiln will gain in temperature, but you're also going to get these carbon trapping, these dark, halo type of things that happen from a slow moving flame. Um, it just, yeah, well, I want to knock on some wood here. It just hasn't happened here yet where it's been too slow. I just don't, I wouldn't have the patience, I think, if it was going, dragging on. I'm just not interested in firing like I love pots that come out of 7-day firings and 10 days or whatever. That's just not what I want out of my own work. So I'm not interested in that. So I think that would be an example of a really slow, meticulous kind of just sit there and wait type of thing.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, a 3 to 4 day firing isn't very long either.
No, I think it's pretty manageable.
I'm kidding because, sometimes, my students and stuff, they're like, hey, are we firing today? And I'm like, yes. And they're like, well, when can we get them? Today, so it's just an interesting, relationship with
Sure.
time when you're dealing with like different firing methodologies or methods. You've got, electric or even gas kilns. I mean, I fire my gas kiln for 20 hours,
Wow.
and I try to stay above 2000 degrees for as long as possible for those slow melts. But you know it's interesting to hear again like the time relationship for you. A 3 to 4 day firing is a sweet spot, and a 7 day firing is a really long time. So it's like, anyways, it's just something to laugh about. Okay, Um, there's another question from Janet. This goes back to wadding. So this again is maybe a technical question about process. How do you avoid wad marks showing on the rims of your plates?
Hmm. I'm not sure I understand that. Wad
Um,
marks, rims, and plates.
maybe
You mean like too far out, like the wads being too far this way?
I think that's perhaps what she's getting at. I think, with your watering, you're keeping it in. And I think that's more about a difference in how you're wadding your plates, right? So, I mean, I could you maybe what we could talk about is how you're using your wadding as a compositional element, how you're
Mhm.
thinking about the placement of your wads, and then how that integrates with the shape and surface of your plate and what you're expecting from the flame and deposit.
Okay. Well, maybe I know what she was talking about. Like I've made dinner plates before where the wads are out at the edge, but that's a whole different ball game. What I'm trying to do is what you just asked is I'm trying to find the right number. For me, I've always loved the look of five. I know there are other people who do 4 or 7 or 10 or whatever, but five is always given this size plate enough room between the wads that the flame has an easy path and can really deposit on the back side. What I don't want is the front to be really interesting and then the back to be super boring, which I've had when either the plate is too close to the shelf, for example, or there's too many fingers on the crown, which I don't have a picture of. But what I do is I stack all of these on crowns. They look like like a king's crown that has 5 fingers that stick up. And the entire purpose for that is to elevate it off of the kiln shelf so that there's space below it. Um, and I really, it's always occurred to me that five, an odd number is always going to be more appealing to the eye. And then again, it's more about the distance between these plates are not very big. They're probably about 9.5 inches in diameter. Um, a bigger platter, I would probably think about adding more fingers, more wads, but anything more than that on this plate, in my experience, has been too much, and it clogs up that that distance that the flame can get in there, the volume of flame that can get inside of that plate. So that's why I do it this way.
Yeah, and I'm noticing in the chat that they're talking it out.
Uh-oh.
they're they're saying yes, he has plate stands, and so anyway, so it's interesting. Yeah, and what's great about the five, it just definitely I agree. You've got a really nice compositional relationship, and also relating to or allowing the natural processes of the draft to kind of steam through. So there's a really nice balance of ash, flame, and then the color contrast, which is what I'm most attracted to. um, I'm just gonna. I think there's okay. Yes, from Lauren again. She has a technical question. So when you soak it for 12 to 16 hours, what temperature on a pyrometer is it registering? Just wondering if you are more at 2000 rather than hotter, or if you hold it. Oh, I see. So I think she's looking for the temperature at where you're holding. Are you closer to 2000, or are you holding closer to 2300, like towards a cone 10 range?
Yeah, that's a great question because
It
my
is.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I was saying, yeah, I agree. It is a good
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, so my parameter, I don't know what everybody else is using, but for my kilns, I have an 18-inch long probe that sticks in there, and if the digital readout ever reads 2300, which is right around, a little shy of cone 10, there's a major problem. It's way too hot in the kiln. So my holding pattern, what I tell my crew or whoever's firing, is like 2180 on our parameter is just about perfect, and that's like I would say that's a touch on the warm side. If like the firing that we're about to do, the Saturday night goal will be to hold the parameter at 2150, and that's I think it's easy for people to follow because you simply just stick wood in the kiln when that parameter reaches 2150. It'll jump up past that, maybe in the 22 somewhere, and then as it's drifting back down, you can just watch it. It'll drop degree after degree, and then when it hits 2150 again, normal stoke, and that seems to really keep things where they are, and at the same time it'll build heat towards the back of the kiln, because you're just like, it's almost like you're just like pressing on a button, just every time you're just hitting the button. And the kiln seems to really like that. It's a nice, I think, a nice way to do it, and it's easy for people who haven't had a lot of experience to follow along and read, like, the parameter says this, but what does the kiln look like, or what does the kiln sound like, and what does it say? So you can get a lot of information by doing, even if you're just experimenting, by just trying stuff like that. It doesn't have to be the way you don't have to live by that, but if you try something like that over a couple hours, it'll give you, I think, more information than if you just bounce around from thing to try to thing to try, and just bounce around, because the kiln needs time to process what you're doing. There's nothing instant about wood firing.
Yeah, that's interesting that you're talking about, like, your baseline temperature is 2150. That's really interesting information to understand about the stoking cycle, and just kind of your process, because I mean, you clearly have had a lot of experience in homing in your process. I'm just thinking about all of the firings that you've able to accomplish in such a short period of time. I mean, that's an incredible amount of experience to gain. So um, that insight is really really valuable, I think, to a lot of people in the room. Um, well, we've kind of run out of questions in the chat. I just had one more. I know we're getting right up to the 90 minutes here. But I follow you a lot on Facebook, and or I mean on Instagram, and you're very savvy with how you promote your business, and that not only are you a maker, but you're also a seller. You own a business, and you're able to serve as like an example for the rest of the community, to build their own business and survive when making pots. And I was really interested in the self-serve sale, and how that's like a great way, and a very trusting way to to run your sales. But I was curious, as how is there anything you could offer the audience about what you're thinking about, how you're associating strategies in maintaining or building your business, and how that associates with making the time to make your and fire your pots. That's kind of a loaded question, so there's a lot there.
So the trusting thing is not, in my opinion, is not an issue. I don't think people who are going to steal pots, they're not even thinking about, if you're going to steal something, you're probably not going to, that's not your first thing to steal. That being said, I built a steel lockbox, and I welded it to one of these poles that are down here at the kiln shed. This is where the sale happens, is underneath this building, which I just put tables out there and loaded up with pots. But what's been really interesting to me, and I kind of got the idea from people like Mark Hewitt or Kevin Crow, where they're having these firings and they're trying to get the community excited about it. So they'll have, kiln opening sales or parties. And in my experience, once people understand what goes into this process, there's a new appreciation for why a pot costs what it does. A handmade pot, what goes into it really dictates the value of it, in my opinion. So I think people are more willing to spend the money. And then Instagram for me has been, I never knew it, and I almost deleted the account a couple years ago because I was just kind of bored with it. But building an audience online, and then they're willing to either travel or hey, can you send me some images from your sale, and I'll you can maybe ship me something. That has been something I never would have expected, and just being I think open on there to answer questions and being like forthcoming with whatever that people might want to know about, especially if they're genuine and it's not some hacky account or something like that. But being willing to share ideas on that platform, because it's so instant, has been huge for me. And then selling pots through there, I never would have guessed that I could I mean, pretty much everything that I post, there's been an offer to buy, which is pretty crazy in my opinion. But that has drawn new people to this sale. And I also grew up in this community, so a lot of people know of me, not necessarily, I don't know every person, but they know what's going on. They see the sign at the end of the driveway and they can see the smoke a lot of times. Or, word of mouth is pretty great around here. If you're not a jerk, people will respond in kind, and people at least want to come check it out. And then usually I'll find new customers through that way. So and so works with my mom and they recommend, they love your work. So that's been really huge. Just trying to be open, inviting, and then answering emails and questions as they come in. And I think that's been the key, is just to be, like you said at the beginning, a nice guy.
Yeah, well, we certainly appreciate you sharing all of this information today and your experience. I mean, I think considering some of the names that I'm looking in the chat room or the chat box, there's just a lot of people in not only the wood firing community, but the professional ceramic community that came to hear what you have to say. So that's really important, and I really appreciate it, because I this is something that I'm trying to get into, and I'm really interested in it, and I just like to practice in a lot of different ways when it comes to ceramics as well. So the more knowledge I have, the better. So I'm really excited with what you shared today. And again, I'm a fan of your work, and I think a lot of people here are. And I think you've also provided a really great opportunity for our students who are here to see how you can go from being at a university setting and work your way through into owning your own business as a maker or an artist, which is also one of the assets to why I invited you here. So I just, I think from the whole community, just really want to thank you for being so open. And we really appreciate you coming here today to share all of your experiences. So looking forward to the next series. You're the last artist of the Fuse lecture series. And I guess I'm talking to everyone now. If you've missed anything from the beginning, or you care to watch Tim's presentation again, I'll be doing some minor edits and posting that on the Marymount, the MU Fine Arts YouTube channel. You can also go to mufinearts.com to find any of the links associated with the Fuse lecture series. If you also go into the chat, you'll see all of the links to all of those, to the very top of the chat. You'll see the links to all of those websites. And you'll also see a link to Tim Sherman's webpage. So again, thank you so much for everyone coming to join us for the conversation today. I really enjoyed it. I hope you all did as well. And again, Tim, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I always get nervous about this kind of thing, but once you get going, it's pretty easy. And like I said before, if anybody has any questions or anything, my email's pretty accessible. And yeah, I'm around. Stop by we fire a lot, so stop by for a visit if you're in this neck of the woods. Thanks,
well,
Jeff.
I'm definitely going to take you up on that. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again for everyone for coming in, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing you guys soon at the next Fuse lecture series. So keep your eyes peeled. Next semester, I'll plan on putting something together. So until then, have a great afternoon and enjoy the rest of the spring. And thanks again, Tim. I'll see everybody later. All right.